So as all of you know, I've spent about the last 2 years of my professional career throwing a lot of shade at the Blue Origin organization and at Jeff Bezos, and I'm not the only one. It seems that this organization is just the type of company that people love to hate when it comes to spaceflight. Very seldom have we encountered any other kind of spaceflight company, especially a new one that has an innovative vision, subjected to so many types of abuse. I mean, it is a little difficult to understand or believe, especially if you're not familiar with the industry. What really is the problem with Blue Origin? I mean, after all, they seem to have put space tourism on the map, reliably launching astronauts into suborbital flight time and again without any problems. On top of that, they also have a very innovative vision when it comes to reusability, when it comes to man's presence in low Earth orbit, even when it comes to us going to the moon. Blue Origin has some very impressive goals, very lofty goals, and worthwhile goals as far as I'm concerned. However, it's the execution of those goals that's the real problem. Never have I seen an organization with so much financial support that's accomplished so damn little. And recently, I had an opportunity to speak to some Blue Origin representatives at the CES convention, and after getting over the shock of the fact that they didn't want to kill me on the spot, I started to learn about some of their other goals that really haven't been publicized. And I have to admit, this company has many objectives that are both innovative and beneficial to the future of mankind in space. But here's the problem. You can have all the ideas in the world and all the money in the world, and yet not accomplish anything if you don't have the necessary sense of urgency, and that's the problem with this company. And so, just out of a sense of interest, I decided to put together a list of objectives that Blue Origin has for their company. The lofty and impressive list of extremely ambitious goals that this company has placed in front of them, all of the innovative ideas that they have, and how many things they've actually accomplished. And when I actually put everything down and had a good hard look at it, I determined that Blue Origin deserves all the shade that they get, and then some. My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well, so it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry. Given how little Blue Origin promotes this rocket as opposed to New Shepard, which is in the news all the time, it may come as a surprise to you to know that New Glenn represents the entire core of everything Blue Origin is trying to accomplish in low Earth orbit and beyond. Without this rocket, Blue Origin will be able to achieve nothing, none of the goals that they've been trying to get to over the last 2 decades. It's difficult to believe that Blue Origin is putting everything, all of their hopes and dreams, on the future of this one orbital vehicle. And if it is not successful, or all of the time that it gets delayed anyway, delays everything else that Blue Origin is trying to accomplish. This rocket has amazing capabilities, reusability obviously, a 7-meter fairing, a tremendous amount of payload, not only to low Earth orbit, but all the way to the moon without refueling. As a matter of fact, this vehicle may be able to deploy space station modules for the Lunar Gateway that nobody else except the SLS could deploy. You heard that right. Even though the Falcon Heavy is deploying the first two modules of the Lunar Gateway, the European Space Agency IHAB module is simply too big for the Falcon Heavy. However, it might not be too big for a rocket that has a 7-meter fairing, and this would be an extremely good use for New Glenn, as opposed to having to use a $1 to $2 billion rocket in the SLS to deploy one module of the Lunar Gateway. This rocket has a variety of different uses in terms of not only getting payloads to the moon, but also substantial payloads to low Earth orbit, most important of which is the Orbital Reef. This station's entire design is based on New Glenn's capabilities, a 7-meter central core, and in spite of what I may have said previously about this, it's not going to be a repurposed second stage from New Glenn, but actually a module that's built on Earth and carried into orbit within its fairing. Now think about that for a moment. We're talking about a central core 7 meters in diameter and displacing 45 metric tons. That's double the mass of the Japanese Kibo module, plus its experimental module added on to it. Two of the largest modules on the ISS, double it, and that's how much the New Glenn can theoretically carry into orbit. That is simply incredible, and it explains how the Orbital Reef is going to be deployed in only 3 launches. Once again, we're talking about a space station nearly as big as the ISS deployed in 3 launches. That is also simply incredible, and also an obvious reason as to why NASA has funneled over $100 million worth of spending into this project as a replacement space station for the ISS. One of a few that they have going right now, but still a very viable replacement for the ISS that could grow to a much larger size than what we have at the moment. But of course, we have a vision and then we have reality. And the reality of the BE-4 engine, and the New Glenn requires 7 of these things in order to be able to accomplish all of the things that it's theoretically supposed to accomplish, is still not flight certified. This engine has had all sorts of issues over the years and years that it's been in development. It's already at least 2 years late, and this is impacting not only New Glenn, but also the Vulcan Centaur, as I have mentioned many times in the past. And this is the problem with Blue Origin in general. Vision versus execution, and the execution with the BE-4 has been substandard to say the least, and it makes things even worse when we're talking about New Glenn, because unlike Vulcan Centaur, New Glenn does not have a completed Pathfinder version ready to go yet, not even close, which means that New Glenn is highly unlikely to take to the skies in 2022, and more than likely will take flight at the earliest in 2023, and that's assuming that the BE-4 finally gets going as promised. This is an important thing to remember about Blue Origin in general. All of the problems they're having with the BE-4 and New Glenn at the moment cascades over every other objective that they have in the future, especially Orbital Reef. And they have lots and lots of amazing, innovative ideas when it comes to this space station. Not just a great big central core, but also a centralized artificial intelligence system that will allow for the maintenance of the space station without the astronauts, or with very little astronaut involvement. This would simply be an incredible accomplishment, because right now the ISS astronauts have to devote at least 50% of their time in orbit to maintaining and repairing the ISS, whereas if you had a station that could maintain and repair itself for the most part, that would free up the astronauts to do a lot more scientific scientific and engineering work in microgravity. A huge breakthrough if it could be accomplished. In addition to that, Blue Origin intends to have what's called a last-mile tug used in conjunction with this station to help payloads go from low Earth orbit up to higher orbits without having to use a lot of fuel from the ground. A refueling depot essentially complete with a tug. And this whole model fits perfectly into Jeff Bezos' overall vision, which is to slowly increase mankind's presence in low Earth orbit with a gateway essentially that would allow for more and more equipment to be transferred from the Earth's surface to low Earth orbit and then orbits beyond that, perhaps further out into the solar system or to the moon, something along those lines, as mankind slowly transfers more and more industry and other aspects of his civilization out into space, slowly making the Earth a much better place to live when you don't have as much industry on the planet. That is a very paradisaic viewpoint, but really when you look at the reality, we've seen some fabrication on the New Glenn, we've seen a fairing or half a fairing, I'm not exactly certain as to how much of that, but not a complete Pathfinder version of the rocket, and really that's about it. Well, there's a little bit more if you take into account all of the work they've been doing at Cape Canaveral on their future launch sites. As a matter of fact, Cape Canaveral has proven very, very grateful for all of the work Blue Origin has done out there and the over $1 billion worth of new business that Blue Origin has brought to the Cape Canaveral area. It's been very, very impressive, at least as far as prep work is concerned. We're talking about manufacturing facilities that thus far have looked rather empty, and also some launch pads, some very well-designed launch pads that include, by the way, a deluge system, which Starship doesn't have yet. A lot of completed work on this project at the moment, minus the rocket. It's almost like they're doing everything in reverse, and that is disturbing to say the least. I mean, look at this. Look at all of this empty space. Yeah, they can do a lot here, and it's very encouraging as to what could be done with Blue Origin in the future, but really, what is being done? What sort of tangible results do we have for all of the years that Blue Origin has invested in Jeff Bezos' vision? Frankly, we haven't seen very much at all aside from New Shepard and some BE-4s that are not yet flight certified. And all of this makes me wonder how much of Blue Origin is really legitimate and how much of it is just smoke and mirrors, because already Blue Origin has received substantial funding from NASA and lesser funding, but still substantial, from the US Space Force for rockets that do not yet exist. And if you compare this to other similar contracts that have been granted to other launch providers, generally these are launch providers that have already gone to orbit. SpaceX, obviously, also Rocket Lab and Virgin Orbit, all of the companies that secure these sorts of contracts with NASA and the US Space Force have proven themselves, and yet Blue Origin expects and oftentimes receives the kind of money that these other companies receive. Frankly, it strikes me as being a little bit arrogant. It's almost as if they're saying, hey, look at us. Jeff Bezos owns this company. He's the richest guy on the planet, or at least the second richest depending on the day, and so you know that we're going to accomplish all of these amazing things. It's just a matter of time. So NASA and US Space Force, give us all those millions of dollars of investment because you know we're going to come through. We don't have to demonstrate anything to you. I mean, really, how else can you look at it besides that? I mean, even Sierra Space, who also hasn't sent anything to orbit, at least not completely. They do have some equipment in orbit on the ISS and elsewhere. They at least have built Pathfinder versions of their inflatable space station modules. They have a completed Dream Chaser that will go to orbit this year. It's really mostly relying on the Vulcan Centaur and, ironically, the BE-4s. Sierra Space has accomplished a lot more in terms of tangible things with a lot less money, and yet Blue Origin expects to get a lot more money than they do from NASA and the government. And there are so many examples of this philosophy, it's difficult to keep track of them all. For example, the recent US government military grant made to ULA and to SpaceX for the future launches of US military satellites for the next 5 years, a very valuable contract. Blue Origin took the government to court, expecting to be treated just as SpaceX and ULA was being treated, even though they've never been to orbit and did not have the capability to put a single military satellite in orbit at the time of the contract. On top of that, they've also received funding from the US Space Force in order to provide transportation from one part of the planet to the other for military supplies, emergency relief supplies, that sort of thing, something that the Starship is well set up to do, and something that Blue Origin says that the second stage of New Glenn will also be able to accomplish. Of course, they don't have any physical examples of this yet, whereas Starship does, but it doesn't seem to matter. Blue Origin is getting the funding anyway, and nowhere is this more apparent than with the recent contract with NASA and Artemis and the whole HLS system. The whole national team proposal was very odd in the first place. Blue Origin was teaming up with two companies that had a tremendous amount of experience in the field of aviation and spaceflight and had sent a lot of stuff to orbit, but Blue Origin was the managing partner. They were the guys in charge of everything, and that was very odd given the fact that they had the least experience. And when it came down to it, it showed in the overall design. Blue Origin, a company that supposedly championed reusability, built a 2/3 non-reusable vehicle with an unbelievably high and unsafe ladder, and it had lots of other problems aside from that technically, and it was also quite expensive. Strange coming from a company that has more money than God, but still. People can charge whatever they want to, it just put them behind the 8 ball when the final contracts were due. And then, when they lost, predictably given all the problems that this lander had, they sued. Twice, holding up the entire project for more than 6 months. If this isn't an example of arrogance, I don't know what is. A company that held up mankind's return to the moon for more than 6 months, insisting that their deeply flawed lander was the best way for us to return to the moon, and they were willing to put the entire Artemis project at risk in order to prove it. But let me be perfectly clear about one thing. Even though I find a lot of the things that Blue Origin has done recently to be reprehensible, especially in terms of their litigation, the overall vision that Jeff Bezos has for mankind in space, I'm all for it. The notion of building a vibrant space ecosystem, as they say on the Orbital Reef website, the idea of moving a massive amount of mankind's industry and population out into space to have thousands or perhaps millions of space-related jobs in the future, and to clean up our planet by moving so many of the things that damage this world out into space, whether it be manufacturing, mining, that sort of thing. I am completely in favor of that. However, given the pathetic amount of progress that Blue Origin has made in the last 20 years, and also when one considers the billions of dollars that have been spent on this enterprise thus far. Yeah, about $1 billion a year, and perhaps that isn't enough, but if you compare it to organizations like Skyrora and Black Arrow, who could easily reach orbit with $1 billion, it is a little sad, and really, we should have seen a lot more progress from Blue Origin given the financial capabilities behind this company. company, given the enormous amount of resources and wealth that could have been invested and actually have been invested in this company. We just should have seen a lot more results, but we haven't. And yet, the whole vision remains so compelling. Anyone can experience space, as they say on their website. Experiencing spaceflight and seeing the Earth from space are life-changing. Floating free and weightless, awed by Earth's thin blue biosphere, you see 16 vibrant sunrises and sunsets a day while flying over all of humanity. What magnificent words, and what a magnificent picture that paints. But it's just a picture until we actually see some tangible results. And thus far, in my opinion, it appears that Sierra Space has a lot more invested in this overall vision than Blue Origin does, especially considering that they raised nearly $1.5 billion from the private sector, as opposed to about 1/10 of that Blue Origin got from NASA for the same project. So Sierra Space has 10 times as much money raised for the same project, and it almost seems that Sierra Space is more committed to Jeff Bezos' vision than Blue Origin is, as ridiculous as that may sound. And yet Sierra Space has created a lot more tangible things for such an environment and for such an ecosystem than Blue Origin has, and in my opinion will continue to spearhead the Orbital Reef project, the fuel depot, the orbital tug, and everything else that comes with it to make it into a true gateway for the human species to exploit the solar system. Sierra Space seems to be the one leading the charge on this. And by the way, I would love for that to change. I would love to see Blue Origin live up to the vision, to actually carry out some of the innovative things that they talk about and actually execute. And they may be doing that behind the scenes right now. But until I actually see results from this, I'm going to continue having the same opinion that I've always had. So come on, Blue Origin, prove me wrong if you can. If you like what I have to say, if you enjoy this type of commentary, you know how to support me. It's all in the description, and please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. I could certainly use your support. So until Blue Origin actually does step up to the plate and deliver on the vision that Jeff Bezos has painted for us all, until they actually make this dream into a reality, as unlikely as that may seem, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.